I thought it was just a summer vacation, until one quiet look from her made me realize some connections aren't meant to end when the season does. The moment I stepped off the bus, the heat wrapped around me like a held breath. Not suffocating, just present. The kind of warmth that slows your thoughts and makes you feel like time itself has agreed to take a vacation. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen, and somewhere beyond the low buildings and palm-lined streets, the ocean was breathing steadily, as if it had been here long before any of us and would remain long after summer ended. I was here to disappear for a while. No deadlines, no expectations, just long days and unstructured evenings. I told myself that whatever happened here would stay here, safely tucked away like a postcard you keep but rarely revisit. That was when I noticed her. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It was the way she paused near the cafe entrance, adjusting her sunglasses with an easy, practiced motion. The way she stood comfortably in her own space, unbothered by the crowd moving around her. She wore a light summer dress that moved gently with the breeze, and there was something quietly elegant about her. Nothing forced, nothing trying to be noticed. She glanced up, and for a brief second our eyes met. It wasn't charged or intense. Just a look, but it held weight. Like she saw me not as a stranger passing through, but as someone momentarily sharing the same air, the same sun-soaked stillness. I felt my steps slow without realizing it. Inside the cafe, the cool air was a relief. I stood in line, distracted, replaying that brief moment in my head. When I reached the counter, I fumbled my order slightly, still unsettled by a feeling I couldn't quite name. Then she was there again, standing beside me, close enough that I could sense her presence before I saw her. She smelled faintly of something floral and clean, like laundry dried in the sun. She turned toward me with a small, polite smile. "Do you know if they serve anything iced here?" she asked. Her voice was calm, warm, unhurried. I shook my head lightly, then laughed under my breath. I was about to ask the same thing. She smiled a little wider, and for a moment we stood shoulder to shoulder, our arms nearly touching. The closeness felt oddly intimate, though nothing about it crossed a line. Just two people sharing a pause in the middle of a slow afternoon. We exchanged a few words, nothing personal, nothing revealing. Where the best seating was. How the afternoons here seemed longer. Ordinary conversation, yet it carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. She listened when I spoke, really listened, her head tilting slightly, eyes steady on mine. When our orders were ready, she picked up her drink and turned toward me. "Enjoy your stay," she said softly. "You too," I replied, though I wasn't sure why the words felt heavier than they should have. As she walked away, the sunlight caught her hair, and I realized something subtle but unmistakable had shifted. I had arrived expecting rest, maybe distraction. Instead, I felt a quiet anticipation settle in my chest, an awareness that this place, this summer, might hold more than I had planned for it to be. Why the second morning, the town had already begun to feel smaller. Not in a confining way, more like it was slowly folding in on itself, turning strangers into familiar shapes. The streets followed predictable paths, the cafes remembered your order, and the sea was always there, steady and waiting. I told myself it was coincidence when I saw her again. She was seated on a wooden bench near the water, a book resting open on her lap, sunglasses pushed into her hair. The early sun painted everything in soft gold, and she looked completely at ease, one leg crossed over the other, her foot lightly tapping the ground as if keeping time with her thoughts. I hesitated before approaching. Part of me didn't want to interrupt whatever quiet moment she was having. Another part, the louder one, didn't want to walk past and regret it later. "Good morning," I said finally, stopping a few steps away. She looked up, recognition blooming instantly in her expression. "Coffee guy," she said with a small smile, closing the book. "Good morning." That smile, unhurried, genuine, settled something in me. We talked easily, as if we'd already broken the invisible barrier that usually exists between strangers. She told me she liked mornings here because the town felt honest before the crowds woke up. I told her I hadn't decided yet if I was a morning person or just jet-lagged. She laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded. As we spoke, I became aware of the space between us shrinking. Not abruptly, just naturally. I sat on the bench beside her, leaving room at first, then inching closer as the conversation deepened. At one point, a breeze rolled in from the water, cool against the heat of the day, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Without thinking, I offered, "Want to sit closer? It blocks the wind a bit." She studied my face for half a second, just long enough for my heart to thud, then nodded. That would be nice. Our shoulders brushed when she shifted. The contact was brief but electric, sending a quiet awareness through me. Her arm rested near mine, so close that I could feel warmth through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Over the next few days, these moments repeated themselves. We didn't plan to meet, yet somehow we did. At the same cafe, along the same stretch of beach. Once, in the late afternoon, we walked side by side through a local market, the air filled with the scent of citrus and grilled food. When the crowd thickened, she reached out and lightly touched my forearm, guiding me through. That touch stayed with me long after she let go. Our conversations grew deeper, though never rushed. She spoke about life with a quiet confidence, choosing her words carefully, as if she understood their weight. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, about uncertainty, about wanting more than what I'd planned for myself. She listened without interrupting, eyes steady, expression thoughtful. Sometimes she'd nod slowly, sometimes she'd smile, and once, when I admitted something that made me feel exposed, her hand rested gently on my knee in reassurance. It wasn't flirtation. It was something steadier, more intentional. By the time the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft blues and pinks, I realized how comfortable I felt beside her, how natural the silence had become. And as we parted that evening, exchanging a lingering look instead of a goodbye, I understood something quietly powerful was unfolding. Layer by layer, moment by moment, by the fourth evening, the air felt heavier. Not with heat, but with something unspoken. The kind of weight that settles when two people know they're circling the same truth, neither quite ready to name it. We walked along the shoreline just as the sun began its slow descent. The tide was low, leaving the sand cool beneath our feet, textured with ripples that caught the fading light. She carried her sandals in one hand, the other occasionally brushing against mine as we walked. Each time it happened, it felt intentional without being deliberate, like the tide itself nudging us closer. We talked, but not about much. Small observations, the color of the sky, how the evenings here seemed to stretch longer than they should. Our words filled the space, yet there was a growing awareness of what lived between them. At one point, she stopped walking. I turned to face her, unsure why my chest felt suddenly tight. She was looking out at the water, her expression thoughtful, distant. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear slowly, as if buying herself time. "Do you ever feel like places remember you?" she asked quietly. "Even when you don't belong to them?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood completely. "Yeah," I said, "like they hold pieces of you without asking." She smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. We stood there in silence, waves folding in and out, the world narrowing to just the space we shared. Then she turned toward me fully. Her gaze lingered, steady, searching. I felt exposed under it, like she could sense everything I was trying not to show. She reached out then, her fingers closing gently around my wrist. The touch was light, grounding, her thumb resting against my pulse. I was suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating, how close she stood, close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, marks of laughter, of time lived. "I like how present you are," she said softly. "Most people rush through things. You don't." The words settled deep. I swallowed, unsure how to respond without saying too much or too little. "I feel steady when I'm with you," I admitted. "Like I don't have to be anywhere else." Her grip tightened just slightly, enough to send a warmth through my arm. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt charged, delicate, as if one wrong word could break something fragile. She let go first, her hand lingering a fraction of a second longer than necessary before falling back to her side. "I should head back," she said, though her body didn't turn away. "Yeah," I replied, even though every part of me hoped she wouldn't. We walked back together, slower than before. When we reached the path that split toward our separate places, we stopped again. She stepped closer this time, close enough that I could feel her breath, warm against the evening air. "Good night," she said. "Good night," I echoed. She hesitated, then leaned in, not far, not fast, and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. It was brief, almost innocent, but it sent a quiet shock through me, like something long asleep had stirred. Her message came in the late afternoon, simple and careful. "If you're free tonight, there's a quiet place near the cliffs. I thought you might like it." I read it twice, feeling a mix of calm and nerves settle into my chest. This felt different, intentional in a way our previous meetings hadn't been. The path to the cliffs was narrow, bordered by tall grass that whispered when the wind moved through it. She was already there when I arrived, standing near the edge where the land dipped gently toward the sea. The sky was soft with early evening light, and the ocean below reflected it like a sheet of glass. "I'm glad you came," she said, turning toward me. Her smile was warm, but there was a vulnerability beneath it I hadn't seen before. "Me too," I replied honestly. We sat on a smooth rock overlooking the water, close enough that our knees brushed. This time, neither of us shifted away. The silence felt intentional, like we were both waiting for something important to surface. "I didn't expect this," she said after a while, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Meeting you, feeling this." I followed her gaze, giving her space to continue. "What does it feel like?" I asked gently. She exhaled, slow and steady. "Surprising, and a little dangerous. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar." I nodded. "I get that. I keep telling myself this is supposed to be simple, a vacation. But it doesn't feel simple when I'm with you." She turned then, really looking at me. Her hand found mine, resting lightly at first, as if testing whether it was welcome. When I didn't pull away, her fingers curled around my palm. Her skin was warm, grounding. "I notice how careful you are," she said softly. "You don't rush me. You don't assume." "I don't want to," I said. "This matters to me." The admission hung between us, fragile but true. She squeezed my hand once, then leaned in, her shoulder brushing against my chest. I lifted my arm slowly, giving her time, and when she settled against me, I rested my hand gently on her upper arm. The contact felt steady, reassuring, less about desire, more about closeness. She tilted her head, resting it lightly against my shoulder. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, calm but deliberate. For a long moment we stayed like that, the sound of the waves below filling the quiet. "I don't usually let myself do this," she murmured. "Do what?" "Feel without planning the ending." I looked down at her, my chin brushing her hair. "We don't have to decide anything tonight." She smiled at that, a small, grateful curve of her lips. Then she lifted her head, her face close to mine. Close enough that I could see the emotion in her eyes, hesitation intertwined with resolve. She leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek, lingering just long enough to feel intentional. When she pulled back, her hand slid from mine to rest briefly over my heart. "I'm crossing a line," she said quietly. Nothing had changed on the surface. The same sun, the same slow rhythm of the town, but something inside me had shifted. What we'd shared now carried weight. Not heavy in a bad way, just undeniable. Like stepping into deeper water after telling yourself you'd stay near the shore. We didn't meet right away. That absence made me notice how quickly she'd become part of my days. I found myself scanning cafes without realizing it, listening for her laugh in passing conversations. When my phone finally buzzed, it was later than usual. "Can we talk today?" she wrote. We chose a quiet park shaded by old trees, the kind of place meant for reflection. When I arrived, she was already seated on a bench, hands folded in her lap. She looked composed, but I could sense the effort behind it. "Hey," I said softly. She smiled, but it didn't fully settle. Hi. We sat together, leaving a small space between us this time. Not distant, just careful. She took a slow breath before speaking. I've been thinking, she said, about us, about how this looks from the outside. I nodded, my chest tightening. Me too. She turned toward me, her expression honest, almost apologetic. I don't regret what we shared, not for a second. But I've lived long enough to know how quickly people label things they don't understand. I watched her hands as she spoke, fingers tracing invisible lines against her knee. I wanted to reach for her, but I stayed still, letting her lead. I don't want to turn this into something careless, she continued, or something that leaves either of us hurt when the summer ends. The words landed softly, but they landed deep. I swallowed, choosing honesty over reassurance. I'm scared of that too, I admitted. Part of me wonders if I'm ready for something that feels this real. She looked at me then, relief flickering across her face. Thank you for saying that. The space between us felt heavier now, filled with everything we weren't touching. After a moment, she reached out. Not for my hand, but for my wrist, her fingers wrapping gently around it. This isn't me pulling away, she said quietly. It's me trying to protect what this is. I turned my hand slightly, my thumb brushing against hers. The contact was small but grounding. I don't want to lose this, I said, even if it's complicated. She smiled sadly. Sometimes the most meaningful things are. We sat in silence, the leaves above us shifting in the breeze. Eventually, she stood, hesitating before stepping closer. She rested her forehead briefly against my shoulder, just for a second, her hand pressing lightly against my chest as if memorizing the feeling. I need a little space, she whispered. Not distance, just time. I nodded, lifting my hand to rest gently on her back. Take all the time you need. When she stepped away, her eyes lingered on mine, full of things left unsaid. She walked off slowly. Not the days that followed were quieter, stretched thin by thought. The town still moved at its unhurried pace, but I felt like I was standing just outside of it, watching everything through glass. I replayed our last conversation more times than I could count. Not her words alone, but the spaces between them. The way her hand had lingered on my wrist. The softness in her voice when she asked for time, not distance. I respected that, but I also knew silence could turn into something heavier if left untouched. On my final evening before leaving, I sent a message I rewrote 3 times before pressing send. I'm walking down to the beach tonight. If you feel like joining me, I'd like that. She didn't respond right away. I told myself I'd be okay either way. The sky was already deepening into twilight when I saw her silhouette approaching along the shoreline. She walked slowly, barefoot, her dress moving gently with each step. When she reached me, she stopped just close enough that I could feel her presence again. Familiar, grounding. Hi, she said. Hi, I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. We walked without speaking at first, the waves folding over themselves beside us. Finally, she broke the silence. I didn't want to disappear, she said. I just needed to be sure I wasn't acting out of fear, or letting fear make the decision for me. I nodded. I've been asking myself the same thing. She stopped, turning to face me fully. The fading light softened her features, but I could still see the uncertainty in her eyes. This connection, it surprised me, she admitted. Not because of you, because of how deeply I feel it. I took a breath, then stepped closer, not touching yet. I don't need promises, I said. I just don't want us to pretend this didn't matter. Her shoulders relaxed slightly at that. It mattered, she said without hesitation. She reached out then, her hand sliding into mine with quiet certainty. This time there was no testing, no hesitation. Her fingers fit naturally, like they'd been there before. I lifted her hand gently, pressing my thumb against the back of it, feeling warmth bloom at the contact. I don't know what happens next, she said softly. We don't have to, I replied. We just have to be honest while we're here. She smiled, slow, genuine, and stepped closer until her forehead rested against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, giving her time to settle into the embrace. She exhaled, her body relaxing fully against mine, and for a moment, everything else fell away. "This feels right," she murmured. I rested my chin lightly against her hair. "It does." She tilted her head up, eyes searching mine one last time, as if confirming what she already knew. Then she leaned in and kissed my cheek, soft, lingering, intentional. When she pulled back, her hand remained on my chest, feeling my heartbeat beneath her palm. "Let's not let fear be the loudest voice," she said. I smiled, covering her hand with mine. "Agreed." We stood there as the last light slipped from the sky, hands intertwined, no longer avoiding the truth of what we'd found. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. The town faded behind the bus window, sun-bleached buildings, slow streets, the quiet places where moments had learned our names. I expected the distance to dull what we'd shared, to turn it into something nostalgic and distant. Instead, it clarified it. We stayed in touch gently at first. Messages that didn't demand anything. A photo of the ocean from her morning walk. A voice note from me after a long day, describing something ordinary that suddenly felt worth sharing. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. What surprised me most was how natural it felt. When we met again weeks later, it wasn't dramatic. No running embraces or sweeping declarations. Just a familiar smile across a cafe table, the kind that warms you before you even sit down. When she reached for my hand, it felt like continuity, not reunion. Her fingers slid between mine, confident and unhurried. I noticed how comfortable she seemed now, how little she guarded her reactions. She leaned in when she laughed, rested her shoulder against me without hesitation. And I realized I wasn't questioning myself anymore either. We talked openly about logistics, about fears, about how others might see us. But those conversations no longer felt like obstacles. They felt like proof of how seriously we took each other. One evening, as we walked through a quiet neighborhood, she stopped beneath a streetlight and turned toward me. The light caught the softness in her expression, the depth in her eyes. "You know," she said, "this doesn't feel like a summer fling anymore." I smiled, lifting my hand to brush a strand of hair from her face, my fingers lingering at her temple. "No," I said, "it feels like something that chose its own timing." She stepped closer, resting her head against my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her waist, pulling her in just enough to feel her warmth, her steadiness. The world felt quiet again, like it had on that first evening by the water. What we built wasn't dramatic. It was intentional. We learned each other in layers, her confidence paired with vulnerability, my curiosity shaped by patience. She taught me how to slow down, how to listen beyond words. I reminded her that desire doesn't fade with time. It deepens when it's seen. There were moments of doubt, of course, but they no longer scared us. We faced them side by side, hands linked, choosing honesty over assumption. Now, when I think back to that summer, I don't think of it as something that ended. I think of it as the beginning of a rhythm, one that continues quietly, steadily, even when the seasons change. Sometimes we sit together in silence, her hand resting comfortably in mine, her thumb tracing small circles against my skin. In those moments, I feel it again, that same calm certainty I felt when I first met her. If the story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt a connection that arrived quietly but stayed, tap like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what moment stayed with you.